Probably should have told you to bring some popcorn for the reading of the scripture today. It is a mighty long story, but a very important story, and with parts that really can't be left out. So, with that having been said, listen now to these words from 1 Samuel, the 17th chapter. Now, the Philistines gathered their armies for battle. Saul and the Israelites gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah and formed ranks against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And there came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail. The weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Choose a man for yourselves. Let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "Today I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of Jesse, who had 8 sons. David came to the encampment one day as the army was going forth to the battle line, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. As David arrived, the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the rank of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All the Israelites, when they saw the man, fled from him and were very much afraid. The Israelites said, "Have you seen this man who's come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel." And David said to the man who stood by him, "Who is this Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, the leader of the army, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head, clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor. He tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I'm not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the river and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand. He drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me. I will give your flesh to the birds of the air, to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save, by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck Goliath on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Once upon a time, there lived a husband and a wife in a small house in a big city. One day, as he was making his way towards the kitchen for some Chips Ahoy, the man noticed that a tree, a sapling really, was growing through the living room floor. He thought about mentioning it to his wife, but he didn't, lest he appear foolish, for who ever heard of a tree growing through the living room floor? His wife noticed the tree also. She didn't say anything either. With each passing day, the tree grew larger. Pretty soon, it was no longer a sapling, but a sturdy young tree. The man and his wife watched the tree grow, but they never mentioned it. For who ever heard of a tree growing through a living room floor? Time passed. The tree grew like wildfire. Every fall, it would shed its leaves on the rug, and the man and his wife had to spend a great deal of time cleaning up around it. But they never mentioned it to each other, for who ever heard of a tree growing through a living room floor? As time went by, the trunk got thicker and thicker. Every day, the man and his wife had to make a bigger and bigger detour in order to cross the room. As the branches spread every which way, they had to bend their heads to walk. Both of them were unhappy with the situation. Neither of them saw fit to mention it. For who ever heard of a tree growing through the living room floor? One day, however, after bumping his head on a branch for the 50th time and cussing like a sailor, the man had had enough, and he said to his wife, "Dear, it seems that there is a tree growing through our living room floor." His wife said that she too had noticed it, and that she wasn't very happy about it because she spent so much of her time cleaning up after it. And the man said he was tired of sucking in his gut to walk around it. So the next day, with just a little bit of inconvenience, they had the tree removed. The man and his wife were much happier. And after that, whenever a tree started growing through the living room floor, they removed it before it got to be too much of a problem. Which brings us to our first truth about trees growing in living rooms. The tree is not the primary problem. Indeed, the point of that wonderful parable is that it is the lack of acknowledgement more than the growth of the tree that lies at the root of the problem. Once the man and his wife acknowledged its presence and admitted that it bothered them, some great tree removal strategies could be employed. What is the tree, you ask? Well, let me be a bit like Jesus and answer that question by asking another. What is it that you're not talking about in your living room that's beginning to cause difficulties in some significant relationship in your life? The simple truth of the parable is that trees have to be faced in order to be fixed. Seldom do things go away as a result of being ignored. By nature, most people would rather skirt things than face things. Most people would like to believe that you can really let sleeping dogs lie, and either they will never wake up, or if they wake up, they will arise with sweet dispositions and an erased memory bank. Most people would like to believe that time really does heal all things. even though it's been my pastoral experience, that very few things are healed by time, and that most things are healed by people who work hard at it with an openness to the empowering presence of the Holy Spirit. The fact of the matter is that we delude ourselves if we think that denying the existence of the tree means that it has no power to affect our life. The tree in that story extracted enormous concessions from the two people who would never acknowledge its presence. They had to clean up after it. They had to detour around it. They had to duck under its branches. Make no mistake, unacknowledged trees take an enormous toll. If you serve any length of time as a pastor to people, you will come to the stunning realization of just how many folks, how many individuals, how many couples don't talk about the trees that are growing in their living rooms. I'm talking about saplings that have now turned into sequoias because they have been left unattended, unaddressed, and unpruned. Sometimes, many times, in fact, sadly, those trees show up in the form of people. In a conversation I had a few months ago with one of my spiritual mentors, a guy by the name of Bill Ritter, he shared with me a story from a mission trip that he took a while back to Costa Rica. He said this: during an off day on our trip, several of us went on a walking tour through the Costa Rican rainforest. It was a phenomenal experience. The terrain was lush and green and dense and dark. It was jungle-like in nature, and there was vegetation everywhere. Parts of the rainforest are so dark that 70% of all new life grows on the top of trees. It was the first time I ever saw ferns and orchids and other plant species spreading from the tops of tree branches, literally hundreds of feet off the ground. Things grow up there because there is light up there. Periodically, we'd come to a place where a giant tree had fallen and destroyed everything in its path. But then something strange and wonderful had happened. By falling, the tree had created space, allowing light into the clearing. New growth resulted from the light, which is a process that the experts call reforestation. All of this led my friend and fellow minister LaVere Webster to say this to me as we walked: Bill, do you ever get the feeling that some people will never grow until a giant oak that towers over their lives falls, creating a little bit of space, allowing a little bit of light? Some people will never grow until a giant oak that towers over their lives falls. Talk about an image fraught with possibilities. Just think about it. What events, what incidents, what traumas, what people are the giant oaks, the towering trees, the giants that dominate your thinking and your living? The chairs in my office, both here and back in North Carolina, are saturated with the tears of couples who for too many years have denied the existence of problems in their marriage. The fabric is dotted with the salty tears of a dad whose pride keeps him from saying, "I'm sorry," to his son. The armrests have absorbed the silent sobs of men and women who've neglected their spiritual life for far too long, only to be in the midst of a health crisis or economic calamity for which they have no faith to comfort or guide them. What were once saplings are now sequoias. Our inclination is to live with what we're used to in our lives. Instead of choosing what could be, we almost always choose what is, no matter how dysfunctional or frustrating it might be, because the comfort of sameness outweighs the unpredictability and the energy drain of stepping out in faith. But our problems, left ignored and unchecked, begin to feel like giants. Think about it. Your marriage is mired in mediocrity. It's easier to not talk about it or to seek counseling. You need to work on reconciliation with a friend, but the mere thought of the effort needed overwhelms you. You need to deal with areas of your life that are less than pleasing to God, but the potential pain of changing steps stops you in your tracks. So let me ask you a very pointed question this morning. Are you, or is someone in your life dying today, emotionally, spiritually, maybe physically, because of denial, ignorance, or an unwillingness to deal with the way things are? If so, where is God calling you to say enough is enough? To get up and go face your giants. Here's the not so subtle nudge from the Spirit and from the Scripture today. It's time to get some therapy. It's time to find a way to make it to AA. It's time to get a life outside of your own little world. It's time to serve someone in need. It's time to quit blaming others, to quit blaming God. To fell your giant, you have to face your giant. You are not alone. You are not relying on your own power on this journey. But do you believe that? One of my very favorite books, I've mentioned it to you before, you need to buy it. It's entitled A Guide to Rational Living. It's written by a psychologist named Albert Ellis. Ellis offers this great model for understanding how people respond to the circumstances of their life. He calls the model the ABCs of emotional life. A stands for actual event. These are the things that happen to us. They are our circumstances, our situations. C stands for the word consequences. These are the results that come from the actual events of our life. Ellis says that we let our circumstances control our consequences and the way we feel, which means that if good stuff is happening to us, if we get a promotion, if it's a nice day, if someone pays us a compliment, then we feel good. Conversely, if something bad happens, we crash and burn. We find ourselves living at the mercy of our circumstances. Ellis goes on to say this, and this is the linchpin, so listen closely. In between the A of actual events and the C of consequences is a very important letter. The letter B stands for our beliefs. It is our belief about what happens to us that ultimately determine the way that we feel. Those beliefs can and do affect our consequences. That is why two different people can be in precisely the same situation, experiencing identical circumstances, and yet have totally opposite responses to it. Because where they differ is in their belief. What you believe matters as you face the Goliaths, the giants of your life. Now, Goliath still roams our world today. He just masquerades under different names: debt, doubt, disaster, dialysis, deceit, disease, depression. Your Goliaths will try to steal your sleep and embezzle your peace and joy, but they don't have to dominate you. You have a resource for dealing with them. What Max Lucado calls the 5 stones of David. So here's what I want you to do. Face down whatever giant is trying to dominate your world, and do what David did. Pick up 5 stones, make 5 decisions. You ever wonder why David took 5 stones into battle? Why not 2? Why not 20? Rereading his story from 1 Samuel reveals 5 answers. You can use your 5 fingers to remind you of the 5 stones that you need to face down Goliath. Let your thumb remind you of the stone of the past. While everyone else quivered in the presence of Goliath, David remembered what God had done. God had given David strength to wrestle a lion and to strong arm a bear. Wouldn't he do the very same thing as he faced a giant? 1 Chronicles 16 says, remember God's marvelous works. Remember what he's done for you. So look back over your life. Has he not walked you through some high waters? Has he not brought you through some tough times? Pick up the stone of the past. Remember that the same God who delivered you then will deliver you now. Remember that. And then, number 2, select the stone of prayer. Note the valley between your thumb and your finger. To pass from one to the next, you must go through it. Let that remind you of David's descent. Before going high, David went low. Before ascending to fight, he descended to prepare. Don't face your giant without first doing the same thing. Dedicate time to prayer. When David soaked his mind in God, he stood tall. When he didn't, he flopped big time. Invite God's help. Pick up the stone of prayer. And then don't neglect to pick up, number 3, the stone of priority. Let your tallest finger remind you of your highest priority, God's reputation. David saw Goliath as a chance for God to show off. Did David know that he would exit the battle alive? No, but he was willing to give his life for the reputation of God. What if you saw your giant in the same manner? See your struggle as God's canvas on which he will paint his multicolored supremacy. Trust God's promise in all things. He is working for the good. And then reach for number 4, the stone of passion. The scripture says this: as Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag, taking out a stone, he hurled it from his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in. Goliath stumbled and fell face first to the ground. David ran, not away from, but toward his giant. You have to do the same. Seek the help you need to take your Goliath down. Let your ring finger remind you to take up the stone of passion and to face your giant. One more stone, one more finger remains. The stone of persistence. Why did David carry a quintet of stones? Maybe because Goliath had 4 relatives the size of Tyrannosaurus Rex. For all David knew, they'd come running over the hill to defend their kinfolk. Sometimes the giants in your life are like the game whack-a-mole. You ever play it? You think they're gone, and then they pop up over here. Sometimes it takes more than one stone. One prayer might not be enough. One apology might not do it. One day, 1 month of resolve might not suffice. You might get knocked down a time or 2, but don't quit. Keep loading the rocks. Keep swinging the sling. David took 5 stones. He made 5 decisions. Please do likewise. Remember what God has done in the past. Invite God through prayer into the here and now. Make it a priority to remember that God is working for good in your life. Face your giant with a passion that says, you're not going to dominate me anymore. I'm getting the help that I need. And keep being persistent. The next time your Goliath wakes you up, reach for a stone. That's what Mary Beth Chapman did. It was late afternoon, May 21st, 2008. when the lives of Mary Beth and her husband, the Grammy Award-winning musician Stephen Curtis Chapman, changed forever. Maria, their 5-year-old daughter, was excited to see her big brother Will as he got home from school. Will help me climb the monkey bars, she shouted as she ran out of the house and ran towards his car. She was so small. She was in his blind spot. The unthinkable happened. She was airlifted to Vanderbilt Medical Center, but the trauma was too great. Out of her grief, Mary Beth wrote a book entitled Choosing to See, in which she says this: obviously, I never planned to write this book. No mom can come up with words to express the ripping pain of losing a child. No words can do justice to the mysteries of God in the midst of tragedy. When people ask how we're doing, the first thing I always say is, I want Maria back. I want my son Will not to have this as a chapter in his story. I believe God can handle my heart, my questions, my anger. The question is, what do I do with it all? What do I do with God? In the midst of such heartbreak, do I really believe that all things work together for good for those who love him? The answer to that question has come, she says, at a great cost. It has been agonizing to choose to see God at work through the tears of losing my daughter. I have, however, experienced the kindness, the faithfulness, the redemptive heart of God. I believe none of my tears have been wasted. Even in this free fall of pain, my faith has held on most days. I've learned that hope is real. I've found that even in the awful pain of tears and grief, so intense you think it will kill you, that my family and I can survive. We'll never get over our loss, but we're getting through it. And I have prayed that our journey through the shadows might be of some help to those who have experienced similar pain, that our stewardship of this would comfort other people. But I need to be clear, she says. This book isn't just about the day that Stephen and I lost our precious Maria in a terrible accident. It's about a story that God is writing. All along the way, he's changed my story in ways I didn't like. I've had whole chapters added and deleted, strange plot twists that I never saw coming. The truth is, I was born with a plan. I wanted life to be safe and predictable. My plan was to marry someone with a nice 9-to-5 schedule and have a tidy, organized life, everything under control. Absolutely none of that came true. But what I found is that it is in the most unlikely times and places of hurt and chaos that God gives us a profound sense of his presence and the light of his hope. So this book isn't so much about me. It's about God, how he can comfort and carry and change us on our journey, no matter how hard it is. Whether I'm at a good place or a place that's hard, sad, mad, or desperately hopeless, I've found that even when the path is darkest, he leaves little bits of evidence along the way. Breadcrumbs of grace, I call them, that can give me what I need to take the next step. But I can only find them if I choose to see. If I choose to see. Let's choose to see it clearly this morning, my friends. To fell your giant, you have to face your giant. Take that first step today.